40 days. That's how long it took for one of the most celebrated coaching hires in recent NFL memory to transform into what insiders are calling a complete organizational nightmare. Kevin Stefanski walked into Atlanta with 2 Coach of the Year trophies, a reputation for offensive brilliance, and a contract worth tens of millions of guaranteed dollars. The press conference was all smiles. The handshakes were firm. The future looked bright. Fast forward barely a month and a half, and reports suggest Arthur Blank is furious. The locker room is tense. Legal teams are exploring contract termination options, and the entire franchise feels like it's standing on a fault line waiting for the earthquake. This isn't your typical off-season drama. This isn't a minor disagreement about scheme or philosophy. What's reportedly unfolding in Flowery Branch right now could become one of the most stunning coaching implosions the league has ever witnessed. A 2-time Coach of the Year potentially getting shown the door before training camp even opens, before a single snap gets taken under his leadership, before anything gets proven on the field. How did we get here? The answer involves leaked report cards, quarterback controversies, cultural clashes, and a billionaire owner who reportedly feels like he just bought a luxury car that's already breaking down. Let's break this entire situation apart. When the Atlanta Falcons announced Kevin Stefanski as their new head coach, the football world largely nodded in approval. This wasn't some desperate swing at an unproven coordinator. This wasn't a recycled retread getting another chance he probably didn't deserve. This was a proven winner. A man who had hoisted the Coach of the Year trophy, not once but twice in a 4-year span. The kind of hire that makes fans exhale and believe the adults are finally in charge. The reported deal was massive. 5 years, fully guaranteed money that likely pushes into the $40 to $50 million range when you factor in bonuses and incentives. That's generational wealth handed over with the expectation that Stefanski would stabilize a franchise that desperately needed direction. Arthur Blank didn't write that check because he wanted to experiment. He wrote it because he believed he was purchasing certainty. And for about 5 minutes, everything looked perfect. The introductory press conference had all the right sound bites. Stefanski talked about building culture. He talked about developing young talent. He talked about bringing a championship mentality to a roster that was clearly ready to take the next step. Reporters asked softball questions. Cameras flashed. Everyone shook hands and walked away feeling optimistic about the future. Then the clock started ticking. And somehow, impossibly, catastrophically, everything allegedly started falling apart faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 40 days of putting pen to paper, reports began surfacing that painted a completely different picture than that polished press conference. Sources claimed internal tension was already building. Whispers suggested that Arthur Blank wasn't just monitoring the situation with mild concern. He was reportedly furious, not annoyed, not disappointed. Furious in a way that billionaire owners get when they realize their investment might have been a mistake. Think about that timeline for a second. 40 days. Most people haven't even finished setting up their new office in 40 days. They haven't learned where the good coffee is. They haven't memorized everyone's name. They're still figuring out parking spots and building access codes. Yet somehow in that microscopic window, Stefanski allegedly managed to create enough chaos that ownership started exploring exit strategies. The speed of this deterioration is genuinely unprecedented for a coach of his caliber. We've seen quick coaching flames before. We've watched unproven guys get in over their heads and wash out fast. But a 2-time Coach of the Year, a man who took Cleveland to the playoffs multiple times, someone who was supposed to represent the safest possible hire. That kind of collapse in that kind of time frame doesn't just happen randomly. Something fundamental went wrong almost immediately. And the reported list of problems isn't small. It's not one misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. According to various insiders, the issues stack up like penalty flags on a single play. There's the NFLPA report card situation that branded him the lowest-rated coach in the league. There's the alleged tension with Michael Pennix Jr. and questions about whether Stefanski even wanted the young quarterback. There's reported friction with the front office about roster direction. There's chatter about fan protests organizing before a single game has been played. Each of those problems alone would be concerning. Together, they paint a picture of an organization that somehow went from celebratory to crisis mode faster than anyone thought possible. Arthur Blank has owned this franchise since 2002. He's seen coaching changes before. He's navigated disappointment and controversy and everything else that comes with running an NFL team for over 2 decades. The man didn't become a billionaire by panicking at the first sign of trouble. So when reports claim he's genuinely shaken by what's happening inside his building, that carries weight. That suggests this isn't media exaggeration or off-season boredom-creating drama where none exists. The contract itself becomes a fascinating subplot. When you guarantee someone $40+ million, you're not just paying for coaching. You're paying for stability. You're paying for the peace of mind that comes with knowing your leader is locked in for half a decade. You're paying to avoid exactly this kind of chaos. Instead, Blank reportedly finds himself in the worst possible position. He's tied financially to someone he may no longer trust. He's watching his carefully constructed roster potentially get destabilized by internal conflict. He's seeing his franchise become a punchline on sports talk shows before the season even starts. The gamble that seemed so safe just weeks ago now looks like it might have been the riskiest decision of his ownership tenure. And the money, that massive guaranteed sum, sits there like an anchor, making every decision more complicated. This isn't how championship organizations operate. This isn't the stability that elite franchises build their success upon. 40 days in, and the Falcons are reportedly already having conversations that most teams don't have until year 3 of a failed tenure. Something went very wrong very fast, and the rest of this story explains exactly how and why this situation spiraled so dramatically before training camp even opened its gates. Every year, something happens inside NFL locker rooms that most fans never hear about. The NFL Players Association conducts confidential surveys where players anonymously grade their organizations. These aren't public relations exercises. These aren't feel-good questionnaires designed to make everyone look professional. These are raw, honest evaluations from the men who actually live inside these buildings every single day. Players grade everything: coaching, communication, facilities, how injuries are handled, how veterans are treated, how young players are developed. The surveys cover every aspect of what it means to be employed by an NFL franchise. And because the responses are anonymous, players tend to tell the truth. They don't sugarcoat. They don't protect reputations. They say exactly what they think without fear of retaliation. These grades are supposed to remain confidential. They're meant for internal union purposes, helping the NFLPA understand which organizations treat players well and which ones have concerning patterns. Information occasionally leaks, but usually in vague terms. General impressions rather than specific scores. This time was different. This time, the grades didn't just leak. They exploded into public view with devastating specificity. According to Diana Rossini and other well-connected reporters, Kevin Stefanski received a C- grade from his Cleveland Browns players during the 2025 season. In the world of player evaluations, that's not mediocre. That's catastrophic. A C- from the men who strapped up beside you every Sunday, who spent countless hours in meeting rooms listening to your voice, who trusted you with their careers and their bodies. But here's the part that really stung. Reports indicated that Stefanski wasn't just rated low. He was rated the lowest, the absolute bottom. The worst head coach in the entire National Football League, according to his own players. Not according to media critics who might have agendas. Not according to rival fans who enjoy watching other teams struggle. According to the people who actually worked for him day after day. Let that sink in for a moment. 32 head coaches in the NFL. 32 different leadership styles. 32 different organizational cultures. And when players across the league provided anonymous feedback, Kevin Stefanski allegedly finished dead last. Below first-year coaches still learning the job. Below retread hires on their 3rd or 4th chances. Below everyone. That's not a participation trophy anyone wants. That's the kind of label that doesn't wash off easily. That's the kind of information that makes every future employer think twice. The survey reportedly highlighted systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. This wasn't a case of a few disgruntled backups complaining about playing time. This wasn't one bad meeting that left a sour taste. The feedback suggested deeper problems with communication, leadership approach, and how players felt valued within the organization. Systemic issues mean patterns. Patterns mean this wasn't a bad week or a rough month. Patterns mean something fundamental about the leadership style wasn't connecting with the locker room. When multiple players across different position groups independently provide similar negative feedback, that's not coincidence. That's data pointing toward a real problem. And here's where this gets uncomfortable for Atlanta. The Falcons hired Stefanski, knowing full well that his tenure in Cleveland ended poorly. They knew the team struggled. They knew there were whispers about locker room disconnect. What they may not have fully appreciated was just how deep that disconnect ran. Did Atlanta's front office have access to these NFLPA grades before making the hire? Did they know their new coach was rated worst in the league by his own players? If they knew and hired him anyway, that's a bold gamble that appears to be backfiring. If they didn't know, that raises serious questions about their evaluation process. Either way, the information is public now, and it's shaping how everyone views this situation. The timing of the leak itself deserves attention. These things don't accidentally fall into reporters' laps at random moments. Someone wanted this information out there. Someone benefited from Stefanski's reputation taking this hit at this exact moment. Whether that was a disgruntled former player, a rival agent, or someone inside Atlanta's organization trying to build a case, the leak served a purpose. Reports suggest the Falcons are now examining whether this NFLPA data could factor into potential conduct detrimental arguments. If a coach's leadership created documented dysfunction, does that constitute behavior harmful to the organization? It's a stretch legally, but it's a stretch the Falcons are apparently willing to explore. For players around the league, this situation sends an interesting message. Anonymous surveys might not stay anonymous forever. The opinions players share in confidence might eventually surface and influence real outcomes. That could cut both ways. It might make players more cautious about what they write. Or it might empower them knowing their voices carry genuine consequences. Kevin Stefanski now carries this grade around like an invisible weight. Every decision he makes in Atlanta will be viewed through this lens. Every conflict will be interpreted as evidence that the pattern is continuing. Every player who seems unhappy will trigger speculation about whether history is repeating itself. A C- from your own locker room, worst in the league. Those words don't disappear just because you change cities. They follow you into every meeting room, every practice field, every pregame speech. The Falcons knew they were hiring a coach who needed a fresh start. They may not have realized just how much baggage came with him. Arthur Blank didn't build a multi-billion-dollar empire by making emotional decisions. The co-founder of Home Depot understands patience. He understands process. He understands that successful organizations require time to develop and mature. You don't create a retail giant by panicking every time quarterly numbers disappoint. You stay the course. You trust your people. You give strategies room to breathe. That's what makes the reported situation inside Falcons headquarters so remarkable. Because according to multiple insiders, Arthur Blank is not exercising patience right now. He's not calmly monitoring the situation. He's not giving his new coach the benefit of the doubt while waiting for things to settle down. He's reportedly furious. And his fury isn't directed solely at external noise or media criticism. It's allegedly pointed inward at the very people who advised him to make this hire in the first place. When a billionaire owner starts questioning his own inner circle, the temperature inside the building changes completely. Suddenly, everyone feels exposed. Suddenly, every recommendation made over the past several months gets re-examined. Suddenly, the comfortable trust that's supposed to exist between ownership and management develops cracks. And at the center of this reported blame game sits an uncomfortable name. Matt Ryan, the legendary Falcons quarterback, the man who led Atlanta to a Super Bowl appearance, the franchise icon who represented everything good about the organization for over a decade. According to whispers, Ryan was among those who recommended Stefanski to Blank. He supposedly vouched for the coach. He allegedly helped convince ownership that this was the right move. If those reports are accurate, Blank now finds himself in an incredibly awkward position. How do you express frustration with a living legend? How do you tell a man who gave everything to your franchise that his advice might have been wrong? The relationship between Ryan and the Falcons organization has always been built on mutual respect and admiration. Introducing tension into that relationship creates complications nobody wants. But when an owner feels misled, those feelings don't stay hidden forever. They surface in subtle ways, in meetings that feel different, in conversations that carry an edge, in questions that sound less like curiosity and more like accountability. Blank reportedly expected Stefanski to represent the final piece of a championship puzzle. The roster was assembled. Young talent was in place. The offensive weapons were explosive and ready to perform. All the Falcons needed was steady leadership to bring everything together. Instead, Blank allegedly sees chaos forming before the season even begins. He sees his young quarterback potentially being undermined. He sees tension between his coach and his front office about roster direction. He sees national media mocking his franchise over dysfunction that didn't exist a few months ago. That's not what he paid for. That's not the product he thought he was purchasing. Reports suggest Blank isn't interested in apologies or explanations at this point. He wants solutions. He wants an exit strategy. He wants to understand his options for undoing a decision that increasingly looks like a mistake. The shift from supportive owner to frustrated investor happened with remarkable speed. Usually these deteriorations take years. They build slowly as losses accumulate and playoff hopes fade. The owner gradually loses faith as evidence mounts that the hire isn't working. There's a process to coaching separations, an accepted timeline that gives everyone cover. 40 days offers no such cover. 40 days is barely enough time to evaluate anything meaningful, yet reportedly, Blank has seen enough. He's heard enough. He's felt enough tension emanating from his building to know something went fundamentally wrong. Some sources close to the situation suggest Blank is worried about something beyond simple performance. He's allegedly concerned that Stefanski's reputation within league circles is worse than the Falcons realized. He's worried that other teams, other front offices, other coaches view his new hire as someone who lost his locker room. And when perception spreads through NFL circles, it affects everything. Free agents think twice about signing. Trade partners factor leadership instability into their calculations. The entire competitive equation shifts. An owner's worst nightmare is investing heavily in someone who damages the brand. Football is ultimately entertainment. It's about exciting fans and creating hope. When the storyline around your franchise becomes about dysfunction rather than potential, that's a branding problem that costs real money. Blank has spent decades building the Falcons into a respectable organization. The new stadium is architectural marvel. The fan experience is first class. The franchise is positioned as one of the NFL's premier destinations. Watching that reputation potentially erode because of a coaching hire that soured in record time must be genuinely painful. The blame game reportedly continues behind closed doors. Who recommended this hire? Who vetted the NFLPA concerns? Who assured ownership that the Cleveland dysfunction wouldn't follow Stefanski to Atlanta? Those questions don't have comfortable answers right now. And until they do, the tension inside Flowery Branch will likely keep building. Arthur Blank didn't become a billionaire by accepting losses passively. He solves problems. He fixes mistakes. He finds ways forward when conventional paths seem blocked. The next few weeks will reveal whether he's found his solution or whether this situation spirals even further beyond anyone's control. When the Atlanta Falcons selected Michael Pennix Jr. with the 8th overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the football world collectively raised its eyebrows. The Falcons had just signed Kirk Cousins to a significant free agent deal. They already had a starting quarterback. Why would any organization use premium draft capital on a position they'd seemingly already addressed? The answer was always about the future. Pennix represented a long-term play. A young quarterback with elite arm talent who could sit behind Cousins, learn professional football, and eventually emerge as the franchise's cornerstone for the next decade. It was patient roster construction. It was thinking beyond the immediate season. Arthur Blank understood this vision. He approved the pick knowing it might seem confusing in the moment, but would make perfect sense in retrospect. Pennix wasn't just a player. He was a symbol of where the franchise was headed. The young quarterback arrived in Atlanta with serious credentials. Washington Huskies star, Heisman Trophy finalist, one of the most accurate passers in college football history, a competitor who had overcome multiple serious injuries to establish himself as one of the premier quarterback prospects in his class. His arm talent was unquestioned. His leadership qualities were praised by everyone who played alongside him. Falcons fans embraced Pennix immediately. They saw in him the possibility of finally having stability at the most important position in sports. After years of quarterback uncertainty following Matt Ryan's departure, Pennix represented hope. Real, tangible, exciting hope. And then Kevin Stefanski reportedly arrived and allegedly started questioning whether Pennix should even be part of the plan. According to various insiders, tension emerged almost immediately around the quarterback position. Reports suggested Stefanski was exploring other options. He was allegedly interested in bringing in someone else, someone who fit his system more naturally, someone he felt more comfortable building around. The specifics remain murky, as these things always do when sources speak without attribution. But the general narrative painted a picture of a new coach who wasn't satisfied with inheriting someone else's quarterback selection. A coach who perhaps wanted his fingerprints on the most important position rather than developing a player chosen before his arrival. If accurate, this represents a fundamental philosophical clash with ownership. Arthur Blank invested premium draft capital in Pennix. He publicly committed to the young quarterback as the future of the franchise. He told fans this was the direction the organization was heading. Reversing course now wouldn't just be a football decision. It would be an admission that everything communicated over the past year was wrong. The fan base reaction to these reports was predictably intense. Social media erupted with criticism of Stefanski. Message boards filled with passionate defenses of Pennix. The young quarterback hadn't even gotten a real chance yet, and his new coach was allegedly already looking to replace him. That narrative spread fast and burned hot. For the Falcons' locker room, this situation creates complications that extend beyond scheme discussions. When players sense that the quarterback position is unsettled, it affects everyone. Receivers wonder who they'll be catching passes from. Offensive linemen question which protection calls they should prioritize learning. The entire offense operates with an underlying tension that's difficult to mask. Michael Pennix Jr. himself has handled the situation publicly with professionalism. He's said the right things in interviews. He's focused on preparation and development. But internally, knowing your new coach might not believe in you has to affect confidence at some level. Even the most mentally tough competitors feel the weight of doubt coming from leadership. The contrast between how ownership views Pennix and how Stefanski allegedly views him represents the core conflict driving this entire situation. It's not about practice schedules or meeting times or any of the mundane details that usually cause friction between coaches and front offices. It's about the fundamental direction of the franchise. Blank built this roster with Pennix as the centerpiece. The young receivers were supposed to grow alongside him. The offensive system was supposed to be designed around his strengths. The entire competitive timeline was based on Pennix developing into a franchise quarterback over the next several years. If Stefanski came in with different ideas, if he envisioned a different quarterback leading this team, that puts him directly at odds with the owner's vision. And in the NFL, when a coach clashes with ownership over something this significant, the coach almost always loses. The Pennix controversy also connects to broader concerns about Stefanski's ability to develop young quarterbacks. His handling of Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland raised questions. His NFLPA report card suggested player development wasn't his strength. Now he's allegedly clashing with another young quarterback before even seeing him perform in his system. Patterns matter in the NFL. When the same concerns keep surfacing across different situations, that's not coincidence. That's evidence of something real. Michael Pennix Jr. deserves a fair opportunity to prove himself. He deserves a coach who believes in him and designs an offense to maximize his abilities. He deserves the chance that was promised when Atlanta used that 8th overall pick. Whether he gets that opportunity under Kevin Stefanski remains very much in question. And that uncertainty is reportedly a significant factor in Arthur Blank's growing frustration with his coaching hire. When the Atlanta Falcons announced Kevin Stefanski as their new head coach, most of the football world responded with measured approval. Safe hire, proven winner, experienced leader. The narrative was overwhelmingly positive, filled with expectations of stability and playoff success. But one prominent voice refused to join the chorus of optimism. One former NFL MVP looked at this hire and immediately saw problems that others were missing. Cam Newton didn't just express mild concern. He essentially predicted disaster. Newton's criticism wasn't delivered quietly or diplomatically. He went public with his concerns, and he didn't hold back. While analysts on television networks were praising the hire's logic, Newton was asking uncomfortable questions that made people shift in their seats. His focus wasn't on offensive scheme or play-calling tendencies. He didn't break down red zone statistics or third down conversion rates. Newton zeroed in on something much more fundamental. He questioned whether Stefanski could actually connect with certain types of players. He questioned personality management. He questioned cultural awareness. These aren't the typical critiques you hear about NFL coaches. Usually the conversation centers on wins and losses, tactical decisions, clock management mistakes. Newton pushed beyond surface-level analysis into territory that makes front offices uncomfortable. He specifically challenged Falcons ownership to explain how they could look at what happened in Cleveland and still feel confident about this hire. He wasn't vague about it. He essentially said the red flags were obvious, and anyone paying attention should have seen them. Newton referenced the handling of Shedeur Sanders directly. He pointed to how the young quarterback was treated during his time in Cleveland and suggested it revealed something important about Stefanski's leadership style. The implication was clear. Coaches who struggle with confident, expressive players will continue struggling unless something fundamental changes. What gave Newton's criticism extra weight was his perspective. This wasn't some random commentator throwing hot takes into the void. Cam Newton lived inside NFL locker rooms for over a decade. He experienced good coaching and bad coaching. He saw how different leadership styles affected team chemistry and individual development. He understood the dynamics between players and coaches at a level that outsiders simply cannot replicate. Newton also carries a specific cultural significance that made his words resonate differently. He represents a generation of players who brought swagger and personality to the league unapologetically. He changed how quarterbacks could look and act and express themselves. When he speaks about coaches struggling to handle confident players, he's speaking from personal experience. His warning essentially boiled down to a simple argument. Kevin Stefanski's track record suggested he couldn't properly manage players with strong personalities and cultural presence. Atlanta's roster was filled with exactly those kinds of players. Therefore, this hire was destined for conflict. The football establishment largely dismissed Newton's concerns at the time. He was characterized as being overly dramatic or personally biased. Some suggested he was creating controversy for attention. Others argued that coaching credentials should outweigh personality concerns. But here we are, weeks later, and everything Newton predicted appears to be unfolding. The tensions he warned about have reportedly materialized. The cultural clash he anticipated seems to be happening in real time. The very dynamics he identified as problematic are now dominating every conversation about this franchise. Prophets are rarely appreciated until their prophecies come true. Newton stood virtually alone in his skepticism while everyone else celebrated the hire. Now those celebrations feel premature at best. His criticism also highlighted an uncomfortable truth about NFL coaching evaluations. Teams spend enormous resources analyzing tactical tendencies and win-loss records. They study tape endlessly. They conduct formal interviews and check references from around the league. But how much energy goes into understanding whether a coach can actually connect with modern players? The NFL locker room has evolved significantly over the past decade. Players communicate differently. They express themselves differently. They have platforms and voices that previous generations never possessed. Coaching styles that worked 20 years ago might feel disconnected and outdated today. Newton essentially argued that Stefanski represented an older approach that couldn't translate to Atlanta's environment. He suggested the coach's rigidity would clash with the roster's personality. He warned that suppressing individual expression rather than embracing it would create friction. Those warnings are now reportedly being validated inside the Falcons facility. The tension between coaching philosophy and player culture that Newton identified has apparently become the central storyline of this offseason. Whether Stefanski can adapt remains unclear. Whether he's capable of evolving his approach and connecting with players differently than he did in Cleveland will determine his future in Atlanta. But the fact that someone saw this coming months ago suggests this wasn't unforeseeable. It wasn't bad luck or unusual circumstances. Cam Newton read the situation correctly when most others missed it. He understood that credentials alone don't guarantee success. He recognized that cultural fit matters as much as coaching ability. He warned everyone who would listen. The Falcons apparently didn't listen closely enough. And now, they're living with the consequences he predicted before the ink on Stefanski's contract was even dry. Few players have entered the NFL with more attention attached to their name than Shedeur Sanders. The son of Hall of Famer Deion Sanders arrived in professional football carrying expectations and scrutiny that would overwhelm most rookies. Every throw would be analyzed. Every decision would be debated. Every moment of his career would be filtered through the lens of his father's legendary legacy. Colorado prepared him for the spotlight. Playing for Coach Prime meant constant cameras, constant pressure, constant attention. Shedeur developed into one of college football's most efficient passers while simultaneously becoming one of its most visible personalities. He learned to handle media obligations. He learned to manage expectations. He learned to perform while the entire world watched. What he perhaps didn't learn was how to navigate a coaching relationship that didn't embrace who he was. And when he arrived in Cleveland, that reportedly became a significant problem. Kevin Stefanski drafted Shedeur Sanders, which initially suggested belief in the young quarterback's potential. You don't spend draft capital on someone you don't want. You don't invest organizational resources into developing a player you plan to ignore. The selection itself implied commitment. But according to critics, including Cam Newton, what followed didn't match that initial investment. Instead of nurturing Shedeur's development, Stefanski allegedly restricted it. Instead of designing systems that highlighted his strengths, the coaching staff reportedly tried to fit him into existing frameworks. Instead of embracing his confidence and personality, there were whispers that his self-assurance was viewed as a problem rather than an asset. The accusations are serious. A deliberate and systematic denial of opportunity. Those words suggest something beyond normal rookie growing pains. They suggest intentional limitation rather than patient development. Whether these characterizations are entirely accurate remains debatable. Shedeur's supporters see a young player who was never given a fair chance. Stefanski's defenders might argue the quarterback simply wasn't ready for NFL competition. The truth likely exists somewhere between those extremes. But perception matters enormously in professional football. And the perception that formed around Shedeur's Cleveland experience was damaging for everyone involved. Cam Newton framed the situation as representative of a larger pattern. He argued that coaches with certain rigid mindsets struggle to process players who carry swagger and cultural identity. They interpret confidence as arrogance. They view self-expression as selfishness. They try to sand down edges rather than sharpen them. If that characterization applies to Stefanski, Atlanta's roster presents a massive problem. Because the Falcons aren't built with quiet, reserved, head-down personalities. They're built with explosive, confident, expressive young stars who play with energy and emotion. Drake London attacks catches like every reception might be his last. Kyle Pitts carries himself with the assurance of a generational talent. Bijan Robinson plays with joy and creativity. Michael Pennix Jr. brings the confidence of a Heisman finalist who believes he can beat any defense. These aren't players who need their personalities managed down. These are players who need their personalities celebrated and channeled. A coach who tries to suppress rather than embrace will face resistance. And if the Shedeur Sanders situation reflects how Stefanski handles expressive young players, that resistance might already be building. The pattern question is crucial for understanding Atlanta's current situation. One difficult relationship with one young quarterback could be explained by specific circumstances. Personality conflicts happen. Not every player and coach mesh naturally. That's understandable and forgivable. But when similar concerns surface repeatedly, the explanation shifts. When different players in different situations describe similar experiences, that suggests something systematic rather than circumstantial. That suggests the coach, rather than the individuals, bears primary responsibility. Cleveland's dysfunction was explained partly through injuries and roster turnover, bad luck with health, constant personnel shuffling, instability beyond anyone's control. Those explanations have merit and deserve consideration, but they don't fully address the NFLPA report card. They don't explain why players rated Stefanski lowest in the league. They don't account for the specific criticisms about communication and culture that emerged from anonymous feedback. Something beyond injury bad luck was happening in that Cleveland facility. Something about the leadership environment wasn't working. And now the question becomes whether that something followed Stefanski to Atlanta or stayed behind in Ohio. The early reports suggest concerning similarities: tension with a young quarterback, friction with ownership about roster direction, whispers of locker room unrest before meaningful games have been played. The specific players are different, but the dynamics feel familiar. Shedeur Sanders deserved better in Cleveland if the criticisms are accurate. He deserved a coaching staff committed to maximizing his potential rather than containing his presence. Whether he received that treatment or not became a storyline that damaged his rookie season. Now Michael Pennix Jr. potentially faces similar uncertainty. Another talented young quarterback. Another situation where questions surround the coach's belief in him. Another moment where development might take a backseat to philosophical disagreements. The Shedeur situation should have served as a warning for Atlanta. It should have prompted deeper investigation into how Stefanski handles young, confident players. Whether that investigation happened adequately will become clearer as this situation continues unfolding. Patterns exist for a reason. They reveal tendencies that circumstances alone cannot explain. And if Stefanski's pattern includes difficulty connecting with expressive young quarterbacks, the Falcons are about to learn that lesson firsthand. Cleveland and Atlanta exist in different football universes. The cities share NFL franchises, but almost nothing else when it comes to culture, expectations, and identity. What works in one environment doesn't automatically translate to the other. Coaches who thrive in certain settings struggle when those settings change dramatically. Cleveland represents blue-collar football tradition. The city embraces toughness, grind, and an underdog mentality forged through decades of championship drought. Fans expect effort and resilience more than flash and style. The locker room culture traditionally favors quiet professionalism over expressive personality. Atlanta couldn't be more different. The city operates as a cultural capital, particularly for music, entertainment, and creative industries. Expression isn't just tolerated in Atlanta, it's expected. The city breeds confidence and celebrates those who carry themselves boldly. Quiet professionalism feels almost out of place in an environment that rewards standing out. The Falcons' roster reflects Atlanta's energy. Michael Pennix Jr. carries the swagger of a quarterback who believes he can beat anyone. Drake London plays with physical dominance and emotional intensity. Kyle Pitts moves with the assurance of a player who knows defenses can't stop him consistently. Bijan Robinson brings creativity and joy to everything he does on the field. These aren't players who need to be controlled. These are players who need to be unleashed. A coaching staff that embraces their personalities and channels their energy will unlock something special. A coaching staff that tries to suppress and manage will create friction that limits potential. Kevin Stefanski built his reputation in Cleveland's environment. His leadership style apparently worked well enough there to win Coach of the Year twice. He understood that locker room. He spoke that language. He connected with that culture. But those credentials don't automatically transfer. What made Stefanski successful in Ohio might make him unsuccessful in Georgia. The skills aren't necessarily different, but the application absolutely is. Reports suggest this cultural mismatch is already creating problems. Stefanski allegedly arrived with expectations about how things should operate, and those expectations reportedly clash with what Atlanta's players and organization prefer. The disconnect isn't about competence or intelligence. It's about fit. Fit matters enormously in professional sports. Talented coaches fail with talented rosters when the chemistry is wrong. Brilliant strategists struggle when their communication style doesn't resonate with the people they're supposed to lead. You can diagram the perfect play, but if your players aren't bought in, execution suffers. Atlanta's identity demands a certain kind of leadership. The city and its fan base want to see themselves reflected in their football team. They want confidence. They want energy. They want players who look like they're having fun while competing at the highest level. Overly rigid, personality-suppressing coaching feels foreign to that identity. The concern isn't whether Stefanski is a good coach objectively. He obviously has credentials that prove his capabilities. The concern is whether his style translates to this specific environment with these specific players in this specific city. Early indications suggest the translation isn't smooth. The tension reportedly building inside the facility reflects broader cultural disconnection. Players who expected empowerment might be experiencing restriction. A locker room that expected energy might be feeling heaviness. An organization that expected alignment might be discovering conflict. These dynamics can shift. Relationships evolve. Communication improves. Understanding develops over time. Nothing about this situation is necessarily permanent or unfixable, but the window for course correction is smaller than anyone probably anticipated. When ownership is already frustrated and media attention is already intense, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. Every interaction gets scrutinized. Every perceived slight gets amplified. Every hint of tension becomes a storyline. Atlanta deserves a coach who understands what makes this city special. Someone who recognizes that swagger isn't a problem to be solved, but an asset to be maximized. Someone who sees expressive players and feels excitement rather than concern. Someone who can connect with the roster's energy and channel it toward winning. Whether Kevin Stefanski can become that coach remains uncertain. His track record suggests a different approach. His reported struggles with Shedeur Sanders and his low NFLPA grades suggest difficulty connecting with certain personality types. Changing fundamental leadership style is possible but rare, especially under pressure. The culture clash playing out in Atlanta represents more than coaching philosophy. It represents two fundamentally different visions of how football should look and feel. Stefanski's vision apparently leans traditional. Atlanta's roster and fan base lean expressive. Finding middle ground requires flexibility from everyone involved. Stefanski would need to adapt his approach significantly. Players would need patience while that adaptation occurs. Ownership would need to believe change is actually happening rather than being promised. Right now, none of those requirements seem to be met. The reports suggest entrenchment rather than evolution. The tension suggests conflict rather than collaboration. The timeline suggests urgency rather than patience. Atlanta hired Kevin Stefanski, hoping to add the final piece to a championship puzzle. Instead, they might have introduced an element that doesn't fit the picture they were building. And if that fundamental mismatch can't be resolved, the consequences for this franchise could extend far beyond a single disappointing season. Standard NFL coaching contracts include guaranteed money that protects the coach if things don't work out. You agree to lead a franchise for 5 years. The franchise agrees to pay you regardless of whether you actually last that long. If results disappoint and ownership decides to move on, they write checks anyway. That's how the business operates. Kevin Stefanski reportedly signed a deal worth somewhere between $40 and $50 million guaranteed. 5 years of financial security. Even if Atlanta fired him tomorrow, traditional contract structures would require paying every dollar owed. That's tens of millions flowing out the door with nothing in return except a lesson learned. For a billionaire like Arthur Blank, the money itself isn't necessarily the primary concern. He can afford to buy out a coaching contract without significantly impacting his lifestyle or business operations. But the principle matters. The optics matter. The precedent matters. Paying someone $40 million to go away after 40 days sends a message that ownership makes expensive mistakes and just absorbs the consequences. That's not how successful businesses operate. That's not the reputation any organization wants to cultivate. Which brings us to the reported nuclear option. According to various sources, the Falcons' legal team is actively exploring whether grounds exist to void Stefanski's contract without paying the full guaranteed amount. They're looking for loopholes. They're examining specific language. They're building a potential case. The phrase circulating around this investigation is conduct detrimental. That's a legal concept with significant power in professional sports contracts. If an organization can prove that an employee's behavior damaged the franchise's operations, reputation, or competitive standing, certain contractual protections might not apply. Conduct detrimental typically applies to obvious violations. Criminal behavior, substance abuse violations, actions that embarrass the league or organization publicly. Using it against a coach because of locker room management would be unprecedented and extremely aggressive. But reportedly, that's exactly what Atlanta is considering. They're examining whether the NFLPA report card, combined with alleged locker room unrest and philosophical clashes with ownership, could constitute conduct detrimental to the organization. They're exploring whether leadership failures that damage team culture meet the threshold for voiding guaranteed money. If the Falcons actually pursued this argument successfully, the ripple effects would be enormous. Every coach in the NFL would suddenly view their contracts differently. Guaranteed money would feel less guaranteed. The power dynamic between owners and coaches would shift dramatically. Agents would scramble to add protective language to future deals. Coaches would negotiate for clearer definitions of what constitutes conduct detrimental. The entire landscape of NFL coaching contracts would potentially transform based on the single precedent. That's why this option is nuclear. It doesn't just affect Kevin Stefanski. It affects how business gets done across the entire league. Other owners would pay close attention to Atlanta's legal strategy. Other coaches would watch nervously as arguments developed. The NFLPA might even get involved if player survey data was being used against coaches in contract disputes. The legal battle itself could get extremely ugly. Stefanski would presumably fight vigorously to protect his guaranteed money. His representation would challenge every piece of evidence the Falcons presented. Discovery processes would potentially expose embarrassing internal communications from both sides. The whole situation would play out publicly while the organization tried to move forward. Even threatening this approach changes the dynamic significantly. If Stefanski knows Atlanta is considering voiding his contract, every interaction with ownership becomes loaded. Trust evaporates completely. Any possibility of repairing the relationship disappears. You can't work collaboratively with someone who's simultaneously building a legal case against you. Reports suggest the Falcons are still in exploratory phases. They're gathering information and assessing options rather than filing formal actions. But the fact that this conversation is happening at all reveals how badly the relationship has deteriorated. Arthur Blank reportedly doesn't want to write a $40 million check for nothing. He doesn't want to reward what he apparently perceives as failed leadership with generational wealth. He wants accountability. He wants consequences. He wants to feel like he has options beyond just absorbing a catastrophic mistake. Whether the legal arguments actually hold up remains highly uncertain. Contract law in professional sports is complex and heavily precedented. Voiding guaranteed money based on locker room dissatisfaction would be a novel argument that courts might view skeptically. Stefanski's lawyers would certainly make that case. But even if the threat never materializes into formal action, its existence shapes everything happening now. Stefanski knows the organization is looking for exits. The locker room knows ownership isn't committed to this coach long-term. The media knows to watch for developments that could signal escalation. This isn't how championship organizations operate. This isn't stability or alignment or any of the other buzzwords that get thrown around during coaching searches. This is dysfunction dressed up in legal briefs and contract negotiations. The nuclear option exists because the conventional option, paying Stefanski to leave and moving forward, feels unacceptable to ownership. That tells you everything about how badly this situation has deteriorated in such a short time. 40 days ago, Arthur Blank was celebrating a hire he thought would define the next chapter of Falcons football. Now he's reportedly consulting lawyers about whether he can escape the commitment he made. That's not a minor disagreement. That's a relationship that fundamentally broke before it ever really began. Championship windows in the NFL open briefly and close without warning. Teams spend years accumulating talent, developing chemistry, and building toward competitive peaks. When everything aligns, you have a legitimate chance to compete for Super Bowls. When it doesn't, you watch those windows slide shut and wonder what might have been. The Atlanta Falcons currently possess one of the most exciting young rosters in professional football. This isn't wishful thinking or homer optimism. The talent assembled in that building would make any offensive coordinator excited to come to work every morning. Michael Pennix Jr. brings elite arm talent and competitive fire. His accuracy at Washington was historic. His ability to make throws in tight windows and push the ball downfield creates problems for every defensive scheme. When a quarterback possesses that combination of physical ability and mental toughness, you build around him aggressively. Drake London has established himself as one of the league's most physical receivers. He wins contested catches at a rate that frustrates defensive backs and delights fantasy football owners. His ability to high-point balls and body out defenders creates guaranteed completions in crucial situations. That kind of reliability at receiver is exactly what young quarterbacks need to develop confidence. Kyle Pitts remains a matchup nightmare despite inconsistent utilization in previous seasons. A tight end with his combination of size, speed, and route running ability simply doesn't exist elsewhere in the NFL. When properly featured in an offensive system, Pitts can dominate games in ways that transform what a passing attack can accomplish. Bijan Robinson brings versatility that modern offenses crave. He runs between the tackles with power. He creates explosiveness on outside zones. He catches passes out of the backfield with receiver-level skill. His presence forces defenses to account for multiple threats on every snap. Stack these weapons together, and you have the foundation for a dominant offense. Add a developing offensive line and capable complementary pieces, and the potential becomes genuinely exciting. This roster was built to compete now, not 5 years from now, which makes the current dysfunction exponentially more frustrating. Every day spent navigating coaching controversies is a day not spent maximizing this talent. Every ounce of energy devoted to internal politics is energy diverted from preparation and development. Every headline about organizational chaos is a distraction from building toward meaningful games. The NFC South isn't waiting for Atlanta to figure things out. Tampa Bay has experience and stability. New Orleans is retooling with urgency. Carolina is building with young talent. Division rivals smell opportunity when dysfunction defines their opponent. Championships require alignment beyond just talent accumulation. Players need to trust coaches. Coaches need support from ownership. Organizations need singular focus on competitive goals. When any of those elements fracture, talent alone cannot compensate. Michael Pennix Jr. deserves a coaching staff fully committed to his development. He deserves a system designed around his strengths. He deserves the confidence that comes from knowing the organization believes in him without reservation. If that certainty doesn't exist, his growth slows. His decision-making becomes hesitant. His potential remains unrealized. Drake London and Kyle Pitts need a quarterback who's comfortable and confident in the pocket. They need plays designed to maximize their abilities. They need an offensive identity that features their talents rather than asking them to simply fill roles. Wasting their prime years on organizational dysfunction would be genuinely tragic. Bijan Robinson emerged as one of the league's best young running backs during his first seasons. Continuing that trajectory requires stability and creative utilization. If the offensive system keeps shifting based on coaching instability, his development suffers alongside everyone else. The Falcons assembled this roster intentionally. Every draft pick served a purpose. Every free agent signing filled a specific need. The vision was clear. Build a young, explosive offense around a quarterback of the future and let them grow together into something special. That vision requires patience, but also requires proper conditions. Young players need nurturing environments. They need coaches who believe in them and communicate that belief daily. They need organizational stability that allows focus on improvement rather than survival. If Kevin Stefanski cannot provide that environment, every additional day he remains creates opportunity cost. Not just the games that might be lost, but the development that doesn't happen, the chemistry that doesn't build, the confidence that doesn't grow. Other franchises would desperately love to have Atlanta's talent problems. They would gladly trade their situations for the chance to build around these young stars. The Falcons possess something genuinely special, a roster capable of exciting an entire city for years to come. Wasting that because of a coaching hire that soured in 40 days would be among the most painful what-ifs in franchise history. The talent is there. The foundation is solid. The potential is obvious. All that's missing is the leadership to unlock it. And right now, serious questions exist about whether that leadership is currently in the building. Arthur Blank needs to decide how long he's willing to watch this unfold. Because championship windows don't stay open indefinitely, and the clock is already ticking on some of the best young talent this organization has ever assembled. The Atlanta Falcons stand at a defining moment. The decisions made over the next several weeks will shape this franchise for years to come. Multiple paths forward exist, and each carries significant consequences. Ownership must choose carefully because there are no do-overs at this level of professional sports. Path 1 involves attempted reconciliation. Kevin Stefanski adjusts his approach significantly. He commits fully to Michael Pennix Jr. He aligns his philosophy with ownership's vision. He repairs whatever damage has occurred in his relationships with players and front office personnel. Everyone takes a breath, resets expectations, and moves forward collaboratively. This path requires Stefanski to demonstrate genuine flexibility. Not just words in press conferences, but actual behavioral change visible to everyone in the building. Players would need to see a different leader than the one described in Cleveland's NFLPA grades. Ownership would need to believe evolution is occurring rather than just being promised. Reconciliation offers the cleanest outcome. No buyout payments, no legal battles, no public embarrassment beyond what's already occurred. If it works, the narrative shifts from dysfunction to growth. Stefanski becomes the coach who learned and adapted rather than the coach who failed twice. But reconciliation requires trust that may no longer exist. Once an owner starts exploring contract termination options, relationships rarely recover fully. Once players sense doubt from leadership, regaining their full commitment becomes extremely difficult. The damage done in 40 days might simply be too extensive to repair. Path 2 involves uncomfortable coexistence. Neither side fully commits to the other. Stefanski keeps his job through training camp and into the regular season. But the tension remains. Every decision gets second-guessed. Every loss confirms existing doubts. The relationship limps forward without genuine belief from either party. This path might seem like a compromise, but actually represents the worst possible outcome. Coexistence without trust creates toxic environments. Players feel the uncertainty radiating from coaches and ownership. Performance suffers because nobody can fully focus on football. The season becomes a slow-motion evaluation rather than a genuine pursuit of championships. Coexistence often delays inevitable separation while maximizing pain for everyone involved. The Falcons would spend an entire season waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing change was coming but not knowing exactly when. That uncertainty would undermine everything. Path 3 involves immediate separation before training camp begins. Arthur Blank decides he's seen enough. The legal team either finds grounds to void the contract or ownership absorbs the buyout cost. Stefanski departs. A new coaching search begins under challenging timeline pressure. This path carries obvious risks. Finding a quality replacement this late in the offseason presents significant challenges. The best coaching candidates took other jobs months ago. Assistant coaches, who might be promoted internally, would face enormous pressure immediately. The organization would enter the season with inevitable uncertainty about leadership. However, immediate separation also offers advantages. The roster would know definitively who's leading them. Players could fully commit to the new direction without reservation. Ownership would demonstrate willingness to make difficult decisions when necessary. The pain would be acute, but also concentrated rather than spread across an entire season. Path 4 involves mid-season change if things deteriorate further. The Falcons give Stefanski a chance to prove himself through training camp and early regular season games. If results and internal dynamics remain problematic, separation occurs during the season. An interim coach finishes the year while a comprehensive search takes place afterward. This path provides maximum information before making final decisions. Maybe Stefanski finds his footing once real games begin. Maybe the pressure of competition brings everyone together. Maybe training camp builds relationships that currently seem fractured. But mid-season changes rarely produce positive outcomes. Interim coaches face nearly impossible situations. Players must adjust systems and expectations during active competition. Playoff hopes typically die the moment these changes happen. The organization essentially concedes the season while hoping for better next year. None of these paths are ideal. Each involves trade-offs and risks. The situation has deteriorated to the point where good options no longer exist, only choices between various versions of difficult. Arthur Blank must weigh these considerations against his ultimate responsibility. Protecting the franchise's competitive future, maximizing the potential of the talented roster assembled, maintaining organizational credibility with players, agents, and future coaching candidates, not allowing one bad decision to cascade into years of consequences. The next several weeks will reveal which direction ownership chooses. Training camp begins soon, and decisions cannot be delayed indefinitely. Either Stefanski leads that training camp with genuine organizational support, or he doesn't. Either the relationship repairs itself, or it doesn't. Either this franchise moves forward together, or it acknowledges the need for different leadership. Whatever happens, the football world will be watching closely. Other organizations will note how Atlanta handles this situation. Other coaches will observe how ownership treats leaders who struggle early. Other players will evaluate whether this franchise demonstrates accountability and decisive action. The Falcons are at a crossroads. Both paths lead somewhere, but only one leads toward championships. Choosing correctly has never been more important, and time is running out to make that choice. 40 days. That's all it took for a celebrated coaching hire to become an organizational crisis. Kevin Stefanski arrived in Atlanta with credentials that seemed impeccable and left a trail of questions that demanded answers. The NFLPA report card revealed locker room truth. Cam Newton's warnings proved prophetic. Arthur Blank's frustration exposed deeper problems than anyone initially understood. This situation transcends one coach and one team. It raises fundamental questions about how organizations evaluate leadership. Should cultural fit matter as much as credentials? Should player feedback influence hiring decisions more significantly? Should ownership trust instincts over resumes when red flags appear? The Falcons possess generational talent waiting to be unleashed. Michael Pennix Jr., Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, these names should dominate highlight reels and playoff conversations. Instead, they're attached to headlines about dysfunction and uncertainty. Championships require more than talent. They require trust, alignment, belief. When those elements fracture, potential becomes frustration. Atlanta stands at a crossroads that will define this franchise for years. The decisions coming in the next few weeks will determine whether this roster reaches its potential or watches opportunities slip away. The football world is watching, and the clock keeps ticking.